In this movie, we'll be talking about CSS transforms. First off, let's look at Can I Use. If you search Can I Use for transforms, you'll see that most browsers support it, including all the way back to IE9. You'll also see that at the time of the recording of this movie, we needed Microsoft and WebKit vendor prefixes on a lot of browsers. If you go down to CSS3 3D transforms, you'll see that browser support is not nearly as much. If you want to follow along, open up transform.html in your working files folder. Also at the bottom, you'll see that there's actually a link to a wonderful page, the Mozilla Developer Network CSS Transform documentation. This has all of the documentation that you'll need to look things up when you get lost. Let's dive on in. Because I'm using Google Chrome and Google Chrome still needs the WebKit prefix, I'm going to be using the WebKit prefix throughout this lesson. When you write your code, you're going to want to make sure that you put the WebKit and the Microsoft browser prefix, as well as the original. This is what a WebKit transform looks like. Now, within a WebKit transform, you can do all kinds of things. I'm going to show you a couple right now. If I set scale to 0.9, you'll notice this gets a bit smaller. Now I can open up the WebKit inspector here and modify this using the arrow keys. If I use the arrow keys, it does it by integer. If I hold down Alt or Option, it'll do it by 0.1. Now it's very important to recognize that as I make this smaller or bigger, this text down here is completely unaffected. The reason for that is that according to this text, this paragraph tag, this element is taking up exactly the same space it used to take up without the WebKit transform. That means we can do anything we want to this element, and it won't affect any of the elements around it. This makes it ideal for animation and other visual stylistic effects. Now I can do multiple things at once with this. I can say scale 0.9, rotate 30 degrees. Another one that we can do, if I erase these, is translate. If I translate 0, 0, it doesn't move it at all. But if I translate it 100 pixels, 0 pixels, don't forget that comma, you'll see it scoots it over to the right. Again, without modifying or manipulating any of the elements around it. Translate is fantastic for animation for that reason. Now, we can put translate, scale, and rotate in the same line and all of them will happen. But it turns out that the order does actually matter. Let me show you an example. If I turn off word wrap, I can see the entire line all at once. And you can see here I'm rotating it first, then I'm translating it, let's say 200 pixels off to the right. So that's what it looks like with them in this order. If I take this rotate and I put it at the end, you'll see that, indeed, it looks completely different. Let me try and explain this. I'm going to inspect element once again, and now I can manipulate these things just using the arrow keys. If I set this to 0 pixels, translate is not doing anything, okay? And neither is rotate. So if I move rotate to the beginning, and I rotate it 30 degrees, now as I translate it, watch the axis upon which it moves. It moves down and to the right because it's been rotated first. Now if I undo that and I put them in this order here, you'll notice that if I move this, it moves along a horizontal axis, and that's because it hasn't been rotated yet. So the transformations that I put as a value in here, it does actually matter what order they're in, and they go from left to right. The translate in this case happens first, then the rotation. Most of the time that doesn't actually affect you